Thank you. Who is familiar with the recent topic of a political revolution? Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to talk about what does that really mean? Is that something that's going to happen just for the last 4 months and the next 6 or 8 months? Is that something that is going to be something that will happen maybe for the next 4 years, depending on who is president, or 8 years, depending on who is president? What really is a political revolution? And where does that term come from? And why are we actually so lucky here in Vermont to actually know what a political revolution is and what it can be? So I first actually met Bernie Sanders back in 1992. I was a student here at the University of Vermont and met this person who spoke for what they believed in and stood for what he believed in and didn't really waver, which, as you know, has been one of the hallmarks of his campaign this time around. And thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. You can engage in politics, which as a cynical student, I thought, I was sort of tired of it at the time. So you can engage in politics and stand for what you believe in, and maybe change can actually happen. And in some respects now, 20 years later, I stand and go, wow, change is very slow, change is very difficult. But how does it happen? And Bernie has talked about the revolution, and I'm wondering, what do we each think of as what this revolution is? And I can mostly just reflect on what I've seen as a revolution within Vermont that I think from the rest of the country is now fortunate enough to start to see. But the question is it going to be? And the reason I say that is, in Vermont, I engaged with Bernie. That then got me involved in politics. I'm now one of your state senators. And I've looked back at some of the issues of Vermont and really thought, wow, when you look at different states in the country, and you look at policies that states have moved, that have really shifted the discussion in this country, we are actually really one of those places that has uniquely changed so much. For many of you, you may not have known or may not really know much about marriage equality and how it had come to pass in Vermont. But in 2000, thousands of Vermonters talked about their personal experiences with other people and eventually engaged in the political process by discussing politics of all things and humanity of all things with their friends and their neighbors and their elected leaders, and we passed a law called civil unions. 14 years later, people can get married anywhere in this country to a person of the same gender. In all of 15 years, that happened from 2000 to 2015. But that didn't just happen because someone said, let's make this happen. That was partly because here in Vermont, people engaged. And engaging in the political process is what the revolution is all about. It's not even just engaging in the political process for a few minutes here or there, or going to vote on election day. It's engaging day in and day out. Whether, as our last speaker talked about, engaging with the person who falls and creating the change you want to create, but doing that on a daily basis in each of your decisions that you make, in what you buy, or how you react in a circumstance where someone might be being bullied or picked on. Do you just walk away, or do you engage? The political revolution is about engaging. And if you look at Bernie, you sit there and go, how does this guy ever not engage? He's just engaging and engaging and engaging. We don't all quite have to be Bernie, although any one of us could be. And so engagement and being the revolution is what I'm going to talk about here around a couple different issues in Vermont that have shown how you can make that change. So I've just talked about civil unions and leading to marriage, and I'm going to go through a couple issues fairly quickly. But another one that has been happening over time is cannabis reform. We are currently discussing that at the State House, but it all started, well, decades ago by people far before me, talking about, is a policy working or not in our society? And eventually, myself and others started talking about it in the political process. But we are only able in the political process, those of us who are elected, to make change happen we're only able to make that change happen by folks engaging. And so in the cannabis discussion, more and more Vermonters started talking amongst themselves, and then eventually with their political legislators and others to say, you know, the policy is not working. There is cannabis everywhere. It is an underground scenario. Why is this legal or illegal? We started asking questions and having those discussions, and now we are having that conversation. But none of that happens unless each of you engages in that conversation on a regular basis. And so cannabis went from medical cannabis in the early 2000s to expanding towards decriminalization a few years ago, and now we're talking about full-on changing the way we manage it in society, and instead of having an underground scenario to one where we have a managed and regulated system in our culture. Now, again, that doesn't happen because politicians just go, oh, you know, it's time to have this discussion. Because frankly, most politicians are kind of like, for lack of a better word, cowards. We don't actually want to stick our necks out very far, because what happens when you do that is you lose. And if you're engaged in politics because you want to make a few things happen here and there, you say, well, if I'm cautious on all these other things, I'll eventually have enough time to work on getting this one thing done that I really care about. So for the most part, politicians are fairly cautious individuals. It's pretty interesting in this presidential dynamic. We've got two very non-cautious people who are actually leading on either side of the spectrum. Because frankly, most people want more than it. But as political folks, we are very cautious about what we do. And it's only through the groundswell of people out there, you here in this room, and in rooms just like this across the country, that that revolution actually builds up from the bottom and gives political folks the courage to stick their necks out and push that envelope. So whether it's civil unions and marriage, as we did in Vermont, whether it's cannabis reform, which we're currently doing, whether it's universal health care, which we've almost got in Vermont, we stumbled backwards a little bit, we'll hopefully get there. But again, topics that people have to say, something's wrong here, we want you to do something about it, we want change to happen. And that revolution is only going to continue to happen as you engage. I don't know how many folks have seen the YouTube video that in all of 3 days has 20 million hits about Texas Tech University. Has anybody seen that? Nobody. Wow, well, that's good, because it means it's something new for you to see. There was a YouTube video put out by some students at Texas Tech University where they interviewed their peers on campus. And they asked a couple questions. One was, who is the vice president? And of course, they selected who they showed, so I don't know how many folks answered the right answers or not. But a number of people were, not sure. Fair enough. Then they said, the other question, shoot, what was it? Mind blank here. Oh, who won the Civil War? And a number of the students that they asked were like, is this a trick question? Gee, I used to know. What was it? I don't remember. And then they asked, what TV show is Snooki on? I don't even know who that is. But do you all know who that is? Snooki or something like that, some character. And like, the answers were like this, that, and the other. Everybody rattled right off. Another one was, who is Brad Pitt married to? How many people know? Raise your hand. Who is it? Angelina Jolie. Well, they answered that one right on. In fact, a bunch of them even knew that before that he was married to Jennifer Aniston. Well, the revolution isn't going to happen by people getting so absorbed in TV and alternative ways to just take your mind away. The revolution is going to happen by your engaging in your reality. And you can go into these little things that we call a cell phone that are actually computers that a phone function. And we can live in those, and we can live in TV, and we can live in distraction world, and we can let the world go by and let other people dictate to us what's going to happen to you, what's going to happen to our environment and our climate, what's going to happen to your potential opportunities for work, what's going to happen to all those things. Or you can engage and be part of the revolution. Now, I'm not saying everybody in this room has the same set of views on what that revolution is going to be. But we're going to have a lot better chance of making it happen in some direction if you engage than if you don't engage. I'm going to talk about one or two other brief issues where Vermont, by having an engaged citizenry, which for those of you from Vermont probably have grown up and recognized what we do here in Vermont. We have community meetings, town meetings, etc., and discussions on a pretty regular basis. It's small enough that we all know each other. And those of you from somewhere else, hopefully while you're here for a few years or maybe the rest of your lives, will realize and recognize how engaged we can all be. But two other issues that Vermont has led the way on, so I've talked about marriage equality, I've talked about cannabis reform, which a couple other states have done through direct voting. We don't have referendum here, we only have policy making through our legislative body. And again, that means you have to be active enough that political people aren't too nervous to vote for something and recognize that actually people want it to happen. But the two other issues I would say that have happened recently that have been fairly significant with respect to what other states have done or most have not done. Another one is end-of-life choices. And folks may know what that is, some may agree with it, some may disagree with it, but the idea being that an individual, when they're terminally ill, at the end of their life, can be in control of what that last ending really is. It could be that, in most parts of the country, you wait until the body eventually decides enough is enough, and even in those instances, sometimes medically, we just intervene and try to keep things going. In some places, they have advanced directives and so forth to cut back on some of those interventions. Well, in Vermont, we had a very robust discussion that says, to the point where we said, if you are terminally ill, you have the right to end on your own terms. You can ask for a prescription of medication that you can take when you're ready to go. And it's only when you're really right near the end anyway. And that was a very hard discussion. And that was a very deep discussion for a lot of people about what's right, what's moral. Is it someone's choice? Is it God's decision? Is there a God? We had all these kinds of conversations. But we had a very healthy conversation with robust differences of opinion. And in fact, we ultimately voted on it a couple of times. Once in I think it was around 2006 or 8, and it failed. And it partly failed, and I was pushing for that legislation. And I said, let's have the vote even though we're going to lose. Because I think there are people out there that support this legislation, but they think their legislator does. But we're going to show them their legislator is actually voting no because their legislator doesn't think that they do. Or they have their own personal reason for voting no. And so we had this vote, and then about 6 years later, we brought it back again, and some of those legislators were still there. And that time, their constituents were much more engaged in the process and said, I know you voted no last time, but we all think you should be voting yes for this. And a number of those legislators who had voted no the first time voted yes the second time because they didn't realize that the majority of their district supported it. They thought, a lot of people don't want this kind of law, and they didn't really know because folks were not as engaged as they could have been. And so as people became more engaged, the law eventually did pass. And it's that engagement, that political revolution, again, that I'm referencing, that is really in your hands. And, there's a lot going on, and it can be pretty easy to forget about what's happening in the political bodies that make decisions. But you can't really just rely on the people that you elect to then just happen to get it all done. And the reason for that, the reason you can't rely on that, is because there's a lot of forces other than people that are bearing in on how policymakers make our laws. And obviously back to the revolution, Senator Bernie Sanders is changing how that all happens. Because he's saying, you know what, that other force, who can guess what they think that force is they're going to talk about? Shout out the word. Money. Corporations, money. Money drives it. Because what happens is, when you're watching whatever that TV show is with whatever that character is that I don't even know, I have not got a TV, so I'm sort of atypical. All those TV ads, all that information spending money. So whether it's political ads or just ads that say that it's more important to buy these things than it is to engage with your neighbors on what's happening. Those ads and that money in Washington and in Montpelier has a lot of effect. But if people engage, we can overcome that power. And that's what the political revolution is about. And it's not just about these votes in the next few months in primaries and then votes in November. It's remaining engaged so that the politicians can't just sort of do other things because you've turned it off for another 4 years. Just try to stay engaged, be a part of the revolution, and recognize that if you don't, someone else is going to be making the decisions for you. And I guess I'm just going to leave you with that. And the question is, are you going to be a part of that revolution? And how long are you going to remain a part of that revolution? Thank you.